So we're arts and accessibility techniques for engagement, universal design for learning. And as I said, we're going to feature many of our artists. Here's an example of Asma Fegi who was teaching at St. Augustine Senior Center last year and teaching them West African dance. This is Teacher Appreciation Week, as you may or may not know. So I was thinking it might be nice if we all thought of an educator in our lives that we want to kind of dedicate this next time to. Someone who may have had an impact on you. Maybe it was even a student who taught you something. So in terms of appreciation of the students who teach us. So, so think about, if you want to think about that person now, and if you want to put their name in the chat, that might be a nice way to honor them as well. So thank you for all the educators, and especially those who are working so hard now. Our agenda is the chronology of how we're going to be working together. So we're going to walk through talking about teaching roles and experience with teaching. We're going to have an overview of what universal design is outside of learning and the organization that developed it. And we'll also be looking at the main principles and guidelines for universal design for learning. There are a total of 9 guidelines, and so we'll be going through those today relatively quickly. But then we'll also talk about how we think about and talk about universal design in remote learning circumstances. The outcomes that I've identified for today, what I hope you'll learn or what we'll experience, is what the origin is of universal design, as well as I mentioned the 9 guidelines. We'll explore them. We'll link those to neuroscience. We'll consider examples of each of the guidelines from arts education examples, and we'll connect them to our own practice. All right, all right, so now we're ready for our first poll. Maria, if you can put that up. So I'm interested to hear or find out who is in the room, quote, in the room today. Please identify which role that you identify with most. Freelance teaching artist, a school-based educator, educator in other sectors, if you're an arts administrator, or if none of the above apply, click the last box. So that should be open now. Please enter your respective vote or selection now. We're getting I'm not seeing the results yet. Okay. All right. Wow. So over 3/4 of you are freelance teaching artists. 2 of you are educators from the schools. A few of you work in other sectors, and the rest of you are arts administrators. So almost a quarter of you are arts administrators. Excellent. So I think those of you who are arts administrators, if you're working with teaching artists or other educators, I think this will be useful. I think it's also this UDL, like I said, it's a lot about communication. So it works in really any educational setting. All right, and now So since we're talking about education, I want to talk about what doesn't work. And so I want to kind of relate this to our own experience in terms of something that may have been frustrating or problematic for you, where so if you think of a moment from your personal history of teaching and learning, what was something that wasn't successful, wasn't effective? You may have been the learner or the educator. So try to think of that moment. Maybe it was from your childhood, maybe it was from last week or something where it didn't work out. And um, I'm not gonna. It says write down how it felt from the learner's perspective. I don't necessarily need you to think about that. Write that down right now, just in terms of saving time. But just try to see if you can hold that idea in your head as we're going through. I am going to share with you a personal experience of my own that I didn't think was an effective teaching experience. So it was when I was in high school. I was in 12th grade in the chorus, and I was one of a group of about 8 to 10 students who were called in by the chorus director, who said we had to sing a particular passage as a test, and that we were supposed to rehearse it and come into his office and then sing it. So I did practice it. I went in for the test. I was a little nervous and I didn't do that well. And he was very upset and annoyed with me, and he said I wasn't practicing enough, that I needed to practice more. And it was a very frustrating experience for me because I didn't really know how to fix it, because I felt like I was practicing and it didn't work out. So so as a learner, I was very disheartened and disempowered. So I'm just we're going to talk about. I'm going to bring this story back at the end of the session to talk about how maybe thinking about UDL may have addressed or correct the situation. All right, now how about poll number 2? Universal design for learning. How familiar are you with it? Have you heard of it before? Never heard of it? Are you? Do you use it frequently? Could you be giving this webinar instead of me? Kind of interested in the perspective. So please list your appropriate listing there. All right, now we have the results. A few of you haven't heard of it at all. Excellent. I'm so glad to have some people take that risk to kind of learn something absolutely new. I love that. Some people have heard of it, but not a lot. So some have prior training and some have used it frequently. Excellent. So those 3 of you who say you used it frequently, I may ask you to kind of contribute a little bit more as we move along. So yeah, so this is about what I would expect. So that it's nice to see your range. So I'm hoping this will help all of you feel a little bit more familiar with it and maybe a little more inspired to use it some more. So thank you very much. All right, let's move on now. Okay, so what is universal design? So the concept of the phrase of universal design comes from another field. It comes from the field of architecture, actually. And so the idea, as you see on the screen, is that it should be something that's usable by all people to the greatest extent possible, without the need for adaptation of specialized designs. So again, that's about so that's the universal part, that everybody can be accommodated. So it's access for all, or universal access. And the word design is that it's something where it's not just an accident, but it's something that we're thinking about from the design. So and it's not retrofitting. So so in the image included on the screen, you see the exterior of a building entranceway. And if you look closely, you'll see there was a series of steps, stone and concrete steps that were created originally, but to accommodate a ramp, there was this kind of cumbersome metal scaffolding that was created that not only includes the ramp, but includes another set of steps. So here they were trying to provide access for everybody, but it was not part of the initial design. So now we're going to look at another example. And oops. So here's another example that solves the same problem. It takes people from one level to another level. So, and it accommodates people from different, with different mobility possibilities. So those who can walk stairs and those who might need more assistance, including a ramp. So this is something where the idea of multiple users, different types of access was taken into account from the beginning, so that the design included universal access from the beginning. So let me check out the time. So so I would just encourage you to think about what kind of adjectives are how would you, what are some adjectives you would use for this? If you could write that in the chat in terms of, from a design perspective, what that would be. And then Wema, if I can't see the chat, so is there a way you can read some of those responses in the chat box about descriptions for this particular design?
Sure, they're coming in right now. And we have fluid, sleek, modern, inclusive, smooth, inclusive, seamless, efficient, innovative.
Okay, so I heard
Fun, beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Right, I heard inclusive, smooth, seamless, innovative, fun, beautiful. My personal word for this is harmonious, I think.
Geometric, different entry points.
Different entry points, excellent. That's
spacious.
One of our, say that again.
Spacious, flexible.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. That's
and expensive.
well, but yeah, so those are all, I appreciate you thinking in that way. So now let's think about the idea of those ideas of design and those qualities: inclusive, smooth, seamless, beautiful, fun. Let's think about those design qualities as applied not to architecture, but applied to curriculum design. So so the idea of, if it's something, if it does feel welcoming and harmonious, smooth, seamless, in a physical setting, can we create that same kind of feeling and experience in a learning setting? That's really kind of one of the main options, main points there. Excellent. Thank you all for those contributions. All right. So so now let's talk about universal design for learning. So this was developed by a company called the Center for Applied Technology, or CAST. It's an organization that was founded in 1984 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, as you see on your screen. So they initially started as a company that would create what's called assistive technologies, or things that would help people learn if they had particular needs. This could include software that would help people read if they had low vision, or and it can include mechanical devices for people who had other mobility needs and things like that. So they were focused on a range of technology that helped people. And then they realized that they thought, well, you know what? A lesson plan is a form of technology. It's a tool that helps people learn. So they expanded their thinking to think about how to do that. The main authors and researchers for universal design at CAST are Ann Meyer and David Rose. I've admired their work for years. I haven't met them yet. I get no money from this organization. I endorse it just because I think it's all very good. You'll see there the website for the main organization, and then the udlguidelines.cast.org website is the main website that supports universal design for learning. And if that could go in the chat so you can all have that for later as well, that would be helpful. All right, and moving right along. So so in terms of this idea of accessibility and multiple entry points is a really core element about that. This is something we'll see as I take you through the 9 guidelines, but you'll see the phrasing provide multiple means of, provide options for, and so you see in that the image with the 5 stars all pointing to the same point in the circle, that there's more than one way to get for success, so that we can work towards that. And one more poll. I'm keeping y'all busy, keeping those fingers busy. So tell me how you identify. Do you identify as a visual learner, someone who learns through sound, or as an oral learner, about verbal reading, writing, or kinesthetic through movement? And movement can mean not only movement of the whole body, but it can be gross motor movement or fine motor movement as well. So please identify, please select one of those at this time. And we'll, as that comes in, then we'll and here, excellent. So people listed multiple answers. We have 72% as visual learners, 56% as verbal, 48 as kinesthetic, and then 16 as oral. I do know that generally most people, the higher percentage is in visual learners, and I think if I'm correct, that oral is generally listed as the lowest. So in that respect, the group here today is reflective of the general population. I appreciate that that some people put down more than one, because the reason for this kind of poll was to beg the question of, is there only one way to learn? Is there only one way that we learn? And while, and it may be obvious to many of you, but that we may have one preference. Like my preference initially is as a visual learner, but I also know I'm a big kinesthetic learner as well. So no one has, so while we may have one preference, we all learn in multiple ways. And also, this is also to recognize that the people in our classroom may learn the same way that we do, or they may not. And so that as educators, we have to be sensitive to that. And I think that's, yeah. So to be aware of multiple modalities as much as possible. Okay, so on the screen, you are now looking at what's called the UDL guidelines. And if we had the URL up there earlier. If Maria, if you could put up the URL to find this. I really had meant to send this out to everyone before the webinar. I'm sorry that I wasn't organized for you to send this. We're going to go through this piece by piece, and you'll be able to review it later. So I want to call attention to the three main sections that are in different colors from left to right. Green, provide multiple means of engagement, and the three main guidelines below that: options for recruiting interest, options for sustaining effort and persistence, and options for self-regulation. Then in the center section, the purple section, provide multiple means of representation. And then the three main guidelines for that: provide options for perception, provides options for language and symbols, and provides options for comprehension. And then the last column on the right in blue, aquamarine, provide multiple means of action and expression, with three main guidelines below that: provide options for physical action, provides options for expression and communication, and provide options for executive function. So now I'm going to walk you through each one of those very quickly. I'll give you a brief explanation of them, and we'll take a pause after each of these main three principles. All right, yes. So if you have questions or comments, please offer them in the chat as we move along. And if you have an example from your own practice that's related to the guideline that we're speaking of, I'd love to hear that as well. All right, so first we're starting with principle number one, multiple means of engagement, which they call the why of learning. And they connect it to what's known as the affective networks in the brain. That illustration is kind of a cross-section, if you will, of the brain, referring to a couple different sections in the brain that are related to things like emotion and memory. So this is something and this is the internal part of the brain that develops sooner for human beings. So this is a more core part of the human being, and something where I like to remind everybody that all learning takes place within an emotional context, meaning that the learner is always experiencing some sense of emotion. They may be tired, they may feel happy and excited, or they may be confused, or they may feel at risk. A student who is at risk for whatever reason, it may be due to conditions in the classroom or outside of the classroom, but if that student is feeling at risk or threatened, that student will not learn fully. They will, because the brain will not let them fully absorb that situation. So we have to think about engaging the students as a primary endeavor for everything. So now we'll talk about a few ways that we do that. So first of all, we have to talk about recruiting interest. This has to be including providing choice and autonomy, as well as minimizing threats and distractions. So here you see another example from one of our Brooklyn Arts Council programming, where the teaching artist Marissa Metallica gathers ideas from her theater students in grade school. And so this is a way that we optimize relevance, value, and authenticity. We know that if we include the ideas from the students' work, that they're more likely to continue participating. And indeed, you see the students looking at what she's writing, and one of the students has his hand raised in a way to kind of offer yet a new idea. The next guideline under engagement is provide options for sustaining effort and persistence. This is something that's really important in all of the arts. It's something that it's very something we have in the performing arts, where you have to try and rehearse again and again. But it refers also to varying the demands and resources and optimizing challenges. But here's within the photo, you see another example where Alex Schmidt is provide mastery-oriented feedback to ceramic students at the Tompkins Park Neighborhood Senior Center. So the student there is working with the clay on a wheel upon it, and so this is something that is a great is a natural element of arts learning, but it doesn't mean that it always happens, and it doesn't mean that it's always done well. And next, the last guideline for multiple means of engagement is options for self-regulation. This is helping the students have some sense of control for themselves in a situation, and it can include related to expectations, coping skills and strategies, as well as self-assessment and reflection. So the image I chose to reflect this is from a group of drumming students before they would be performing. And as you see here, I mentioned that the teaching artist Onesa Lafontaine promotes expectations and beliefs that optimize motivation. So here he can be talking to them about what it's going to be like to perform, what is, if they're going to feel nervous or excited, and then how to think about it and how to be prepared for that. So that's the first main principle of means of engagement with students. Generally speaking, in the field of education, the arts are kind of seen as easy. Like everybody wants to be engaged with the arts. Compared to, say, history or math. So in that respect, we sometimes have sometimes a little bit easy, especially if it's a self-selected school class. But it doesn't mean that we should take these different levels for granted, in my opinion. All right, so now we're ready to take on some questions or comments, and I'm going to ask Wayma to help us with that in terms of some comments from you all to share.
So right now we don't have any questions or comments that have come in
Okay.
as of yet, but
Okay.
as we do, I will definitely let you know.
Okay.
And you can answer those questions. Okay, one just came in. Does
Okay.
Brooklyn Arts Council use Universal Design for Learning guidelines
Mm-hmm.
instead of or in addition to state or city standards?
Mm-hmm. Not explicitly, actually. We don't. We kind of incorporate it into our general curriculum design, but it's something where we try to be very flexible with our design for our teaching artists, and so it's not explicit for it, but we do provide these kind of trainings to encourage people to think about it. But at this point, we don't we don't have it as a focus for our particular curriculum design. It is something where that if you look on the main UDL website, they talk about how it's not. It's really meant to be a tool to help educators, and that it's meant to be it's meant to be guidelines, and so in terms of not to be too prescriptive for it, and so it's kind of to help educators think about their work. So, I mean, I could see ways that it could be incorporated, but we'll talk a little bit about more. And when I talk about the end, I'll talk about how it applies to learning in general across a learning unit.
Thank you, Paula, for that question. We have two more comments.
Okay.
One comment came from Kimani, and that is that all learning takes place in emotional context was really key to hear. So they really appreciated that section that you talked about, learning taking place in an emotional context. Also, Ilushi, one of our teaching artists, mentioned, I incorporate these points into my teaching process. It is similar to the blueprint for teaching and learning in the arts methodology.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another comment. Is there a product, anthology, performance portfolio that is expected of students at the end of the residency?
Well, I mean, in terms of what we do at the Brooklyn Arts Council, we always expect some sort of culminating or sharing event for sure, because all art should be shared with an audience of some sort, whether it's performing audience or for visual arts. So our curriculum is always oriented to sharing in some sort of sphere, but you know, we always put it in context that's appropriate to the residency. So it might be kindergarten class performing for another set of kindergartners, or it might be high school students who are doing a video, who put together videos, and they have a international night at their school, and those videos are shared with that. So yes, so in that respect, we always think that the art should be shared in some way, so that the student artists get the chance of seeing their work played. Just back to that comment in terms of all learning takes place in an emotional context. That's not just for teenagers and young ones, that's true for adults as well. So anybody who works in a creative aging setting, it may be obvious that that everybody at every age is going through some sort of emotional context. So in terms of being aware of that. All right. Thank you, Wayma. Any other comments or questions, or are we ready?
Yes, there are just two more, and then
Okay.
I think we can move forward.
Thank
One question, and I'll give you both of them right now,
you. Okay.
and then you can figure out how you would like to answer it.
Uh-huh.
Are there examples where UDL was a successful implementation? And a comment was from another artist, I find it very difficult to balance skill building activities with
Mm.
reflection after. There's
Mm.
rarely enough time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so in terms of examples that UDL was successful, that's what I've been trying to do for this whole workshop. So maybe, or this whole presentation. So if that's not clear, maybe a follow-up question to that, I can help you. Yes, it is something, the skill building and reflection in 45 minutes is very extremely challenging, especially if the kids are coming from one room to another, and so you really don't have 45 minutes. You really only have like 38. But it is something where, as much as you can, to encourage, I encourage reflection at some point in the lesson, whether it's the beginning or the end, if you can't do both. And also, I mean, depending on the class, there can be reflection built into other elements. So like a cool down, you can kind of encourage, if you're doing a movement class, there could be a cool down that's happening, and reflections is happening at the same time. So I totally respect the extreme challenge of working within such a short time frame, but it is something I'm trying to emphasize, that this is something that we're trying to appeal to all parts of the brain and how we all learn, and that this is something that will help actually strengthen the learning over the long run. All right. So, okay, so keep the questions coming as we move along. we're going to move on now to the next principle, which is about provide multiple means of representation. And as they call this, the what of learning in terms of how information is shared. And in here, and they talk about the recognition networks of the brain. So you may or may not recognize this brain setup, but the part that's highlighted in this illustration of the brain is actually the back of the brain. So it's this, I'm circling the back of my head here. So it's, so because like actually the part of the brain that processes like the eyes is actually in the back here. So it's one of these elements of evolution that to protect the eyesight, that the processing part of the brain, not only for sight but for hearing and for other parts, is in this back part of the brain that it's processing. So that's what we're going to look at. So now we're going to look at the three related guidelines for that. First is provide multiple means of representation. So provide options for perception, meaning that there are ways in which the information is shared, and different ways that the information is taken in by the students. So here we have one of our teaching artists, Gorga Helga Dautrer, who is teaching sculpture, and you can see that she's providing instruction in multiple ways. She has a screen that has instructions, and then she's speaking, and she's demonstrating. She could even may have had a handout that may have had the same instructions on the screen that the students could have had as well. So if you're having that same information being shared in multiple modalities at the same time, it reinforces it for everybody, but it allows people who may have visual or hearing impairments to also accept it. So if the more options in which you're providing the same information, the clearer that information goes through. A lot of this is a good practice that people develop over years in the classroom, but now we know that it's actually related because it helps with processing with the brain. The next guideline in representation is about options for language, math expressions, and symbols. And so this can be related to in terms of just language, in terms of spoken language, such as English, French, Spanish, any language for that, and helping with that and helping with syntax. But it can also refer to the fact of any type of code code solving, decoding, that's what I'm thinking about. So and so I put in an example here of Alex Chadwell helping his students decode music. That music is a code. It's both a written code in terms of what we see in the staff and the different symbols for notes and rests, but also in terms of a code that we hear. It's an oral code that we hear. So understanding how to break that down, which is one reason why learning an instrument is one of the most challenging things to do, and one of the most engaging for your brain, because you're using so many different parts of your brain. So how are you helping the students understand language, expressions, and symbols in your art form? And then the last guideline for multiple means of representation is related to comprehension. And so this can be about supplying background knowledge, highlighting patterns, helping processing information and maximizing transfer and generalization. And for this example, you see Persephone da Costa providing historic and cultural background for her intergenerational African Caribbean dance class. So by connecting the dance movement with a specific cultural heritage and background, and because she's connecting it to people who may have actually lived in the Caribbean before they moved to Brooklyn, she's connecting them to their own personal history. But then she's building a context and building comprehension for all the students in the class, including those younger students who may have connections to the Caribbean, but not have ever been there. So it's another way of building knowledge and connecting to the understanding and making the learning experience that much richer. Okay, so that is the last part of that section. So ready to hear any questions we have related to that. Oops.
So I'm not sure if folks are still working on it, but I just want to remind you, you can submit your questions or comments in the chat section, and then we can respond to them.
And I want to recognize that I'm moving quite quickly through this because I want to cover a lot in a short amount of time. At the same time, I want to give you a tantalizing taste, so that maybe you go back and explore it on your own.
Great. So we have a comment from Alex Chadwell. And he said that this guideline has really transformed the materials I use. The materials I used to be more inclusive and more diverse. Additionally, I'm much more aware of the spaces I work in now because I try to make them more conducive to learning.
Excellent.
Thank you for your comment, Alex.
Yes, I remember. I remember you took this a similar workshop, if not before, and we talked about that. And yeah, it's really something. The guidelines are really kind of to help expand where you are as an educator. Most of us land in one or a couple of these guidelines very easily on our own. But one element I think of the guidelines that I think is really important is it's really trying to be as comprehensive as possible. And so where are the areas that each of you as an educator, feels like you could improve a little bit or aren't quite doing? And so that's really kind of one idea about what this workshop's about.
We have another comment from Kimani. I appreciate the point of culturally relevant content being a means for accessibility and inclusive learning.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean everybody has a cultural context. Everybody does. So if you're if you're connecting it to them as an individual, that's engaging them. It's a personal connection, but it allows for more deeper learning within the art form as well, and so it's gonna make it a richer experience. So it's an important practice for us to engage in as educators, no matter what. Wayma coined the phrase for us at the Brooklyn Arts Council, we call it student-centered culturally responsive pedagogy, because all pedagogy should be student-centered, and if it's student-centered, by definition, it's culturally responsive. Would you agree with me, Wema?
Yes, definitely. We have a couple more comments.
Okay.
Ed asked if, do teachers find it more challenging to incorporate universal design for learning through virtual or online means?
We're going to get to that at the end. So it is challenging, but there are some specific suggestions that we have that we'll get to in about 10 minutes.
Okay. And Phyllis gave us this wonderful comment. These are all the ways that artists engage in their own practice. So a natural way to teach because it's genuine, and students always appreciate honesty. Beautiful comment, Phyllis. Thank you.
Yes, I agree completely. It is something where, yes, if you're confident in your practice as an artist, then when they see that authenticity in the classroom, they do respond to it. So yes, it is something, and it is something though that a lot of artists have to build over time. To be honest, some newer educators don't always walk into the classroom with that sense of self or self-trust, and they build, but when they build it over time, then they find that the connection with the students and the learning becomes that much deeper. Excellent.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
all right.
and this is a very important question. Thank you,
Okay.
Louise, for posing this question, because I'm sure a lot of people have this question. Can you address the difference and similarities of universal design for learning and learning through multiple intelligences?
Sure. They're definitely complementary, and there definitely is some overlap. So you've been hearing some things. They both look at how people learn and different techniques. Howard Gardner, of course, created the theory of multiple intelligences, and so he was looking at the psychology of how students learn and building on that. And so so in terms of there's similar approaches. Actually, he was based at Harvard too, as these people were. So I don't know to what degree they were working in the same environments, but there's definitely a lot of similarities there. And so I think really the most important thing is to think about like all the different ways to learn that students can learn, and that we're trying to be as accommodating for those different types of learning as we can. And with universal design for learning, it tries to be a little more, I think, a little streamlined to kind of help you address all students as much as possible. I mean, and when I say as much as possible, I want to, reflect that, we can't always reach every student for every lesson all the time. That this is kind of this is our goal to be universal, but at the same time, there is a reality that we, in terms of our own limitations as educators and as students. All right, so Wema, I think I'm ready now for what we're calling the 7th inning stretch. I don't know how long you've been sitting today, but we had this idea of we should probably get some time to move. And so Wema has agreed to lead us through a movement section, and I'm going to stop the share and ask Wema to take us through.
All right, wonderful. Let me see everyone for a bit. Okay, great. So I wanted to provide an opportunity for all of us to breathe for a little, to listen to a little music that welcomed us in, and to just have a moment to stretch. because we need to take that time out every single day and stretch and open up our bodies, especially if we're on the screen or we're at home for most of the day. Okay. So I want you to first plant your feet flat on the floor. I'm making this specific to people that may be sitting in a chair, but you can also stand if you would like to, or you can sit on the floor if you would like to. You can do any accommodation that makes the most sense for you. Let me see if I can do one more thing before we start. All right. Close your eyes. Take a nice deep breath in through your nose. Let the sounds of John Coltrane let us breathe out through our mouths. Take another nice deep breath in. Hold that breath. And now let it out. As slowly as you can. Let's try that one more time. Nice deep breath bring them all the way down. Shoulders up. Shoulders down. Shoulders up. Shoulders down. Thank you for joining us in that time. I will hand it back to Phil.
Thank you so much, Wema. We appreciated listening to your to the music as well as seeing the slideshow on your computer.
I didn't actually realize that. That was a surprise to me as well, but
It was
that's
a treat
okay.
for me to see you and your family and so many fun things. Before we move on to our last section with the guidelines, I see Ben Weber's question about decoding musical notes into sound or language as a helpful example. Other examples of arts-based decoding you could provide. Definitely things like art-specific vocabulary, in terms of, we have so many things in theater that could mean something else. When you cheat on stage, you're doing a specific action. A strike in the theater can usually means when you take out the set. It's not necessarily when the workers stop working. So decoding can also refer to arts specific language and things that are so with that as well. So that's another form of providing options for language and symbols. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen and we'll continue with that. So, and right. Oh, now I'm supposed to look at view. Maria, what was what? I forget. Where's the view?
Oh, so I'm not sure what you did to get there before, but maybe try clicking on your app launcher, the squares in the right-hand corner. There we go.
All right, thank you. All right, so now we're at the last principle of universal design for learning, which is providing multiple means of action and expression. Oh, I don't have the special brain thing. If you look at the top, you'll see that it talks about this is the how of learning, including the strategic networks. And the part of the brain that's highlighted in that illustration is right here in the front of the brain, what's called the prefrontal cortex. And this is the strategic part of the brain. This is the brain that thinks about planning. This is the brain that thinks about planning. And so it's a lot more. It's the more metacognitive element of the brain, and it's the part of the brain that develops last. It doesn't develop until the late teens and early 20s. So our brain is developing and growing as we're going through school and through college. And so in that respect, you have to be thoughtful in terms of, there's a reason we don't ask kindergartners to build, to plan a city with lots of buildings. I mean, we do architectural things, but in terms of there's we have to do it in a way that's grade appropriate and that's appropriate to their learning level. So we're going to look at the first example, which is options for physical action. So that everyone in the learning environment should be able to should not be limited to one expression in a physical action. And again, this is related to any age level or learning level. Here we see an example from one of our Sukasa residencies. It was actually a clowning class, and where the student in this case was provided with some assistance for participating physically. This was a class taught by John Lee and them, who has been able to adapt clowning to working remotely this spring. So I'm sure if the student wanted to provide a learning, explore the situation, explore the activity while sitting down, that would have been an option. So but here, in terms of, we always want to provide options and assistance if we need to, or if we can. And this is where something where like assistive technologies can be helpful to keep so that the learner maintains some independence. The next guideline for under action and expression is for expression and communication. This can often refer to giving the students the opportunity for constructing and composing something. Here is an example from a residency in flamenco dance at Diana H. Jones Senior Center, where the artist Sol Caros builds fluency by leading a performance. And here, fluency is really something where it kind of develops, when you think of fluency, it's something that develops over time. So that this is a performance, but she's as the artist, she's performing with them to help them develop their capacity and their skill in terms of expression. So the next level of fluency could be where they're performing without her. So it's kind of recognizing the gradual step and the scaffolded learning. So and allowing for different types of communication with that. And the last guideline under action and expression is options for executive functions. This is about thinking about being strategic. It's about supporting planning and monitoring progress. And here we see an example of a teaching artist, Pamela Allen, working with students who are creating a mural in their school. And so here they're talking about what's going to happen next. So how do you approach this artistic process in a multi-layered approach, and how are they involved in this? So this is something where not only can the teaching artist explain the process, but also engage in discussion with the student to kind of think what should happen next. What, if we made one decision, what would happen if we made another decision? What would that be? So again, this prefrontal cortex, that when that's developing, that's the part of the brain that does think about consequences, and then does think about steps after steps after steps. So by engaging those students in that process as it's happening, she's helping them understand that particular mural that they're developing, but she's also helping them understand the process of being in control of the project that you're working on. Again, this is something where I think the arts are easier to incorporate if it's done well, because so much of the work that we do is project-based, that we create a mural, or we create a show, or we create a piece of music. And so we're seeing something from beginning to end, and when we're involved in a process like that, we get to be involved in the decision making. So now the question is, to what degree are the students included in the decision making? To what degree are the students involved in seeing the questions that happen? So the more that they're included in that process, the more the executive functions that they'll be involved in, and the more that they'll build those capacities in their brain. So so that wraps up that section. So I'm happy to turn things over to Wayma and our questions on action and expression. Am I Wait, may I see you unmuted yourself? Are you about to read some questions, or do we have?
Yeah, so far we don't have any comments or questions.
Okay.
We will see if some come in. Thank you for everyone's participation in the chat. I also know it takes a little time to send questions and comments, so we
Well,
are aware of that lag. There are a few comments that just came in, so
okay.
I can read some that just came in as we started talking. From Kati, to build inclusiveness, I'm building a scaffold curriculum that I'm able to change and adjust on my way. Alex said, I'm trying to understand. It's a responsiveness to where the students are. I think that's a question. And Kimani came back in, and I definitely remember lessons that I feel in my body much more than those that I simply witness. And this is a really wonderful comment from Phyllis. I always ask students to teach the last class, and they remember every lesson. It's remarkable how when you put them in charge, they shine for each other. And Ronnie said, is it backwards to start with the how instead of the what or why?
Excellent question. I'll get to that in a second. Yeah, I think the more that I love this idea of the students teaching the last class. If students, depending on the grade level and the age level and the length of the residency, the more that they can take on. I love beginning rituals in class, whether it's a performing arts class or a visual arts class, where they kind of start or end the same way, and that the teaching artist leads the ritual, whether it's a reflection or a question or a pass the ball of energy type thing, and where the students learn it so well that they can take that over themselves. But I'm going to definitely get, so we're coming up, we're going to look at UDL with remote learning, and we're going to look at it a little more comprehensively. Any other quick comments or questions that have come in?
Yes. So Alex said, I realized that providing multiple modes of expressions, I'm able to assess my students much more accurately.
Yes.
And Mariano said, how to reach the gap between action and self-belief. Most of my students like to participate and enjoy the work, but they always underestimate their own capacities and don't consider their work as serious work.
Yeah, I think that's a kind of a bigger social question in terms, especially when it comes to kids in junior high, where there's the social stigma about being expressive or being vulnerable. And I think there's a few things about that is like the more, if you can share examples of work, of different types of work that they can be interested in, and kind of see how the artists get involved, as well as you being able to be vulnerable yourself. It's definitely not something that can happen in 1 or 2 classes. It's definitely something where it goes back to that emotional state that they're in. They may feel comfortable with you as the artist, but they may feel the peer pressure to not seem too arty or too expressive. So that is definitely it's something that can be built over time, but it's not always easy. I get that.
And I'm not sure if you want to speak to this a little bit, but Mariano also works with, is a Sukasa artist that works with older adults. So how that applies to them feeling that their work is serious work.
Yes. Well, that's, I mean, with, in creative aging, you can have people who are, have spent decades of their life thinking that they're not artists, or decades of their life being told or hearing in their head that we just don't have the, you don't have any talent. Your sister or your brother or your whoever, that was the talented person in the family. What makes you think you have any of that? So there's definitely a lot of layers built into that, and so it is something where I can understand that they that it is something where if you focus on it can sometimes we talked about mastery focused attention. So if it's less about like, oh, you're a great artist, but if we look at the art form, it's like, oh well, you know can you work on this part of the song, or work on, correct this part of the dance? You've really got this section really down well. So if it becomes less about who they are as an individual, as an artist, but if you focus on the art, they may that may kind of reduce some of the sense of the self-consciousness that they have related to being creative. So, all right, well, if we're ready to move on, I know we're at 5:20, and so I want to kind of wrap this up by 5:30 as possible. So I'm going to move on. So, all right, so Ronnie's question. So here so we're back to looking at the whole Megillah all together. So we see all three main principles in green, multiple means of engagement. I mean, all three principles in color: multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and act and expression. So that's how you read this document vertically. Now we're going to look at the ideas of it horizontally. And that what you see is, if you read it horizontally, that as we go from top to bottom, we're actually growing in deeper types of learning and opportunities. So the top level, you'll see on that tab to the far left, it says access. So this is about helping. This is about creating accessibility for all students in the room, whether it's about interest, perception, and expression for physical action. So it's a learning entry level experience. Now, building on that are these other skills of sustaining effort. Over time, you have to be dealing that. Language and symbols, this is something that we get better with more use and more opportunities to explore that. And expression and communication, this is something that involves building, exploring the arts in more time and with a project. Then we get to this lower level where things become internalized. And this is where we're talking about skills that are at this transferable level that really take weeks, months, years to develop. So in terms of this idea of self-regulation, I know a couple adults who aren't very good at self-regulating. In terms of comprehension, that comprehension comes when we put ourselves in areas where we're challenging what we know, and we build on what we've done, and we're exploring other things. And executive functions, understanding these other things in terms of strategy and planning, that doesn't just happen the first time out. So in terms of understanding, this, that it is something where these levels at the bottom are much harder to achieve, and they take longer. And especially for a teaching artist who sees students only once a week for a few hours, it's something that you can reinforce, but it's something you may not see. You may not see by the end of 10 weeks, but you can kind of work towards it. But what I also like is at the very, very bottom, that these are the goals that we're working towards, that we're working towards students who are purposeful and motivated, that they know what they're doing and they know how to do it, and that they might even go off on their own and create their own puppet show, or they might go off and create their own dance on their own. uh, in terms of representation, that these are students who are resourceful and knowledgeable. They've built some important knowledge, and they know how to find more knowledge, and they're really excited about it, and they feel empowered as learners. And then also that they're students who are strategic and goal directed, that they know how to get there, and they know that they can do that. Now, and I also like thinking about this as kind of like an assessment for ourselves and for us as individuals. I think about people who are strategic and goal directed. There's the story, or not a story, but people who are dyslexic, who have problems processing information, would have some problems, would need some assistance with representation. But they are often extremely strategic and goal directed. Richard Branson, who created Virgin Airlines, he was dyslexic, and he struggled in school, but he always, because representation was problematic for him, that he didn't have enough support in terms of different options for getting information, he had to find different ways to express himself and different ways to take action. And so he became very empowered for himself, and became very goal directed, and could build these businesses on his own. And it wasn't, and he didn't have to worry so much about the information, because he knew how to work against it. So if you're someone who, if you know where your natural excuse me, where your natural strengths lie, you might say, oh, well, I could maybe build on this. It also could apply to your students as well, where you'd be like, well, I'm at a school where the students have a lot of resources, they're very privileged, they're very smart, but the engagement is not there. They are very, they're very, whatever, lackadaisical and unmotivated. So then you can think about, well, if I don't have to worry so much, if they've got all the support in terms of understanding language and comprehension, then we got to really start with recruiting interest and sustaining effort, so that I got to help them understand that the first try is not always the only try, that they can work on that. So that's where I want you to kind of understand that this is all meant to work together. And in terms of the question of do we start with one area or the other, it's really kind of meant to be a inclusive, a holistic approach, and that really that all this good learning is happening at the same time as much as possible. So it's not so much about, oh, well, now I'm going to recruit your interest before I ask for physical action. They should all kind of complement one another in that respect. All right. So I hope that was helpful in terms of appreciating the different levels of that. Also remember this, again, this is an introductory workshop for the most part, that all of this information is available on their website. And then each of these things has a lot more information, an example and research behind it on the website as well. And these little points that are on here with the bullet points and the numbers following them, those are called checkpoints on the website. And they also have more information about them as well. So in terms of a more resource, the udlguidelines.cas.org website has a lot more information. And now we're going to talk about the other question in terms of how do you address this with remote learning. It's definitely something that you can keep in mind, and it is definitely, you do need to make some accommodations. This is from a article written by Gabrielle Rappold-Schlichtman, and I think I have the option for that in the web, in the in the chat section as well. But a few things that you need to do. So you need to explicitly teach for expectations and engagement. You can't take that for granted, because it's so much easier for the students to tune out if they don't know why they're there. So I tried to provide a clear agenda for all of you up front, and I also tried to engage you personally in terms of thinking about both your learning experience as a student, and also to think about an educator of your own. So those were a few ways that I tried to uh, increase engagement from the beginning. This is a big thing, allowing for asynchronous learning, or allowing for learning that doesn't have to happen at the same time or is streaming at the same time. Obviously, this webinar, you're here in real time with us, with me, so that's happening. But if we're going to record it, and you can see it again, and you can watch it on your own time. And so for the sections that are confusing or more meaningful, that you can go back to it, so that allowing artists or allowing students to learn to give them the freedom for them to process the information that works for them. Assigning note takers is helpful, and especially if with a group, in terms of keeping track of that. Here we had someone, Wayma was kind of serving as a voice and a kind of assistant to kind of help with that. Make materials accessible. Again, this is where I failed. I would have really liked it for you all to have that UDL sheet in hand as we had this available. I think that would have made it more richer. And so that's definitely, so learn from my mistakes. Number 5, embrace your students as teachers. So yeah, so I wanted to include the chat because hearing your thoughts, both for me and for each other, is definitely something meaningful. So include that. And then actively build a supportive community. We do try to do that with our teaching artists as much as we can, but also if you have a class in terms of support, how to create systems that they support each other, say through shared learning groups, or things that follow up afterwards. So you can use these ideas remotely. It just takes a little more focus in addition to that. So to continue wrapping up, so I'm going to tell you, I'm going to think about the story that I told you before. Remember where I had to go to the high school chorus director and had to sing for him, and I had practiced, but I didn't do a very good job. And so for years, I was frustrated about that whole experience, because I was just like, this wasn't right. This wasn't what a singing class should be about. And so looking at UDL helped me understand why it was kind of frustrating for me, because the director was talking about this as if it was item number, providing options for sustaining effort and persistence. He was basically saying, you're not practicing enough. If you practice more, you'll be a better singer. And it would be like, that's not, that doesn't help me. It doesn't really work for me. Because what I realized afterwards, it was really a question of perception. So, which is another part of a completely different principle of representation. Because really what it had to do with was my ear training. That I have a minor hearing loss due to a few illnesses when I was a young child. And so actually hearing music and hearing some variations in very difficult music was very challenging for me. So I was willing to learn more music. I was willing to practice, but if I didn't have the kind of training in the way I needed, more practice wasn't going to get me there. So it was something where I felt the teacher wasn't approaching it from the right guideline, from the right perspective, from my needs as a student. So I just wanted to kind of share how my understanding of that as a learning experience was made clear because of me understanding universal design for learning. And I think now we are at the very last section for questions, if people have been offering them. And then we've got one more wrap up.
So we have a comment from Alice. And she said that he judged you, he made assumptions. He also made the issue as you as a person. He did the opposite of what you were teaching us.
Thank you.
And in this time, as people are making their comments, because I know it takes a little while for everyone to kind of get their thoughts out in the chat box, I want to share a moment with a student when I was working actually many years ago as a para at a school for children with disabilities, all types of physical as well as cognitive challenges. And the student that I was working with was really challenged at a specific time when they were working on a song. She just didn't like this particular moment, but it was also something that they would be doing for like their end of the year celebration. And she always indicated, she was nonverbal, but she did some sounds, but she always indicated that she wanted to leave at this time. So we would take a walk to the fish tank that was at the school down the hall and to the left. And she would get an opportunity to visit the fish. And while we were visiting the fish, I would sing the song so that she was still a part of the class and recognizing the things that they were doing in the class that she could still be a part of, even though she didn't want to sit there and physically be a part of it at that time. So figuring out what kind of accommodations we can make for students and recognizing their needs, but also making sure that they are included in the process of what's happening, that they're never separated from the experience that we're offering them is really important to think about.
Beautiful example. Yeah, it was definitely something where you were helping that student feel safer and more calm, and you minimize the threats and distractions for her.
All right, a couple of other comments. Thank you so much, Phil. A couple of comments came in while I was talking. This was amazing. I learned a lot. All this was incredible, incredibly helpful to my teaching practices. Thank you, especially now with video teaching residencies can support our dance with visuals and etc. And then we have another comment. This one is from Marina. The last one was from Lucy. I was super intrigued by the examples you raised in decoding theater lingo. To cheat and strike, never thought of that. And then we have a comment from Phyllis. In my Zoom music lessons, I get lyrics wrong on purpose. That's how when my that's how when my students correct me, I know that they're present. I love that, Phyllis. That's awesome.
Awesome. I love it too. Yes. Yeah, you can test to see if they're paying attention. Beautiful.
And one last comment Marina made was that English is my second language. So also being aware of different language supports that you might need in the classroom. Thank you for that comment as well.
Yes, very good. Excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear that this was helpful for some of you. And it's like I said, I don't receive any money from this organization. I just think it's a great way to think about teaching in a lot of different ways. And so so I expect that some of it was familiar, but maybe some of it was new. And what I'd like to do is now return to how we started and how we thought about our dedication. Am I still here? Yes, here we are. So I asked you to think about someone who had an impact on you as an educator, and to think about dedicating your time today. So now let's go back to think about that person. Then, was that person still part of this process for you? And if so, is there a way that you might kind of take that person and their impact with you further? So you may want to write them an email, let them know you're thinking about them. So just kind of to continue and take that work further with you. So that's all I have to offer today. Thanks again for your time. And I think then I can offer you best wishes in your teaching, whether you're teaching remotely or otherwise. And have a good evening and good teaching. And best wishes.